The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. I am delighted to have Christopher King with us today. He is the founder and CEO of We Are Marcus, which is an educational tech company that is serving youth of color with data-driven tools. Christopher is also taught at an urban charter school. He's worked in operations for President Barack Obama in 2012 and has supported a $200 million fund for education reform, my kind of disruptor of education. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right into a little bit about your past, your path in education first. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. A good way to start. I was raised by educators and an educator in upstate New York. She played both roles of mom and dad, so we joke about that being plural. At that time, I experienced growing up in a predominantly white community, some just racial identity challenges. I didn't really confront that much, but it was brought to me in the form of kids just trying to find out who they are, and that propelled me into a couple of just really revealing and consciousness awareing type experiences, and I moved through schooling with a sense of confusion about how I was being taught versus what I got at home, which was an awesome educator. And then I sort of went into school settings and was trying to pick out my favorite teacher, but always critiquing the way that classrooms are run. It's the consequence of being raised by a teacher, right?
Yes.
I got into the work mostly through activism. I was very interested in making things better, but not necessarily being crazy about ever thinking about being a teacher. My first teaching job was a fellowship under Urban Teaching Corps in Brooklyn, New York. And my mom told me, I was a teacher, so you wouldn't have to be. Like, what are you doing? But the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, right? And at that time, I had an awesome experience teaching 24 students with IEPs, or 24 students in the class, 14 with IEPs. I was a co-teacher, and I supported a teacher that had about 10 plus years of experience. At that time, I very much was interested in accessing multiple learning modalities and breakout groups and dynamic instruction and getting kids on their feet. And I did that effectively. One of my students was having a really hard time identifying the difference between a letter and a number. And for me, the expectation was that he was supposed to be reading in about a month.
Wow.
And that was very, very, it left a huge impression on me to get him to think differently about instruction. I was always the kid who didn't really get it, but at first glance, but if I just took my time with it, I was going to pass everybody. So I saw that in him, and we would just do fun things like skip count in the hallways and, do push-ups to get numbers right. And then, before you know it, he was singing the alphabet and then decoding, decoding text. And that relationship obviously makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And, from there, we were able to get him to promote to the next grade. And at the beginning of the school year, that was not likely. So, rapid growth through building relationships with students really left a significant impression on me, and very much influences the way I go about the work that I'm doing now across active philanthropy to my work in the past 5 years in ed tech. Just thinking about how to do things differently and thinking outside the box to serve more students.
I love that story, because I think we, as educators, we all start with a story of one person, and then it's just like once you get that ether, they call it, of really helping others, there's something very special about that. So now you are the founder and CEO of We Are Marcus. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what you do there.
Sure. Yeah. So the idea there was, I made my way through activism, education, consulting, supporting school leaders with back office support in HR and finance, and all that sounds very boring. I made it exciting for the folks who were interested in serving more students at scale, and also, when we think about the cost of healthcare for teachers. When I was a teacher at 20-something years old, healthcare plans didn't work for me, right? I wasn't trusting of that system. I was just like, I take care of myself, and I don't really need to see a doctor. So all that to say, I had that experience as being a teacher, and I also had a profound experience having a mentoring relationship, which I hope to touch on a little bit. The thrust there as a consultant, you're dealing with, the top half of schools sort of disconnected from the teacher experience, disconnected from the student experience. And I actually got a great experience learning about technology through evaluating tech providers for that HR product, and seeing vendors and thinking, well, if we just patch this together, this tech space isn't that scary. So demystifying that for myself as a non-technical founder was really important early on. And then further reaching those students, thinking about how I create more impact as one of the few Black men regionally who was, out in a position of sort of authority on the costs at schools. But what I started to think creatively about how I take this experience of having exposure to technology and not being as afraid of it, and then thinking about my experience in schooling. I told you earlier that I was raised by a single mother. I had a mentor who was a sort of replacement father at the time in undergrad. And, he really changed my trajectory. I struggled in undergrad in my first year at a 2.7 GPA. I was not prepared from high school to college. Experienced significant racism in high school. I was told very clearly I would never attend a four-year university, right? And I'm talking to you as a tech founder, 2 grad degrees and a professor at a university, right? Yeah. And I was told do not apply. Go to instant admittance at the library. Community college will sign you up. My mom stepped in at that time, and 2 years later, I met my mentor, who fundamentally shaped how I pursued, how I applied my work ethic to academics, and relationship building and networking and putting myself out there. Taught me how to tie my first tie, all these things, and the sort of the broad stroke of that is answering the questions I didn't know to ask. And for me, I wanted to figure out how to scale that effect. So We Are Marcus started with doing a bit of research on who else, has had these experiences. Anecdotally, I was one of 4 Black males who was told, to go to the library for instant admittance, right? Just coming out of that experience thinking, I'm not the only one. Mm-hmm. And I was a B+ student with, captain of 2 varsity teams, vice chair of the economic club, right? This was you think parents, I think, in their highest of hopes, want to take their child and get them in the best educational setting. But at that time, it was, New York City was not the best place to go to school. for public education. And, moving us to the suburbs was a sort of safe haven. What I later found out is that after researching, 24 million students in the country come from fatherless homes. 1 in 3 students have a quality relationship with a mentor. How do I get this group of students that are going into these environments that were not built for their success, and give them the tools and the social capital and measure some of the what they call character growth and social emotional learning? It takes students to the next level so that they can see beyond their immediate circumstance and try to provide some of those answers to questions that they don't know to ask. That's how the tech platform was born. That's how I started to think about, how do we get, some of these educators and their experiences and across occupations to give students exposure to possibilities so that they can connect life after school to school. And that was one of the most profound pieces of my experience as a teacher, as an activist, and as a mentor, working with young people to say, I get it. You're working through this problem, but this is how this is going to relate to this other thing you got, and they can't see it yet, and no one's talking about it. It's all the test, and it's all what tool I need to go to. Kids are going through 14 years at least of get to the next step, but not seeing the big picture. And that's what my mentor provided me. And that's what We Are Marcus essentially does. It's a single sign-on platform to expose students to stories of role models that they may not meet, understanding that matching doesn't work, right? Mentoring effect doesn't scale. Not every mentor can be in every school. So what we do is, essentially a Netflix style experience where we can actively journal on what students watch and hear, and then take that to measuring their responses and providing a dashboard for educators where they can see how students are performing on the social capital that is essentially more about life and the soft skills that allow students to actually succeed in any career track that they pursue, and getting a better sense of what's going on with them earlier on. I know I answered that in this sort of narrative way, but there's a sort of problem solution fit way to articulate that as well. Specifically, each feature of the problem relates to each feature of the solution.
Right. That's amazing. I think I am all about, connecting reality with academia. I love that bridge. There's an equity piece in there. I think we all know that tests and education has a ginormous equity challenge. And so what I want to ask you then is how do you promote equity, technology, and that social emotional learning through ed tech? So kind of going through that, it sounded like you do kind of a Netflix kind of piece, and then you do that. So if I'm a community, how do I get set up with that? And then how does that promote a little bit more? Can you dive deeper into that?
Yeah. Well, school is not designed for students of color to feel safe or supported, right? Under 2% of educators are Black men, right? Staggering stats, right? If any given person, ask them, who their favorite Black male educator is, and a stunning amount of students can't say that they even had one. So starting there, and then the other piece I mentioned earlier about, I think you also mentioned in a way that, tests are not typically built for students to have access to them. Mm-hmm. And we've been working hard. I commend all the educators throughout the country who are working hard to try to make tests more relatable and actually accurately measure the progress of students. So on our platform, what we want to do is we want to engage students where they are and give them content that's relatable, and then have the questions relate directly to their experience and ask them to flush that out. One of the things that we know about student writing, particularly, I mentioned earlier about modalities, students access information differently. So not everybody learns the same. It's a sort of basic differentiation strategy with educators, right?
Yeah.
Good teachers, great teachers do this exceptionally well. Again, full credit to them. We want to leverage that talent in the buildings. So we work in a train-the-trainer model to have an exceptional, a teacher with exceptional relationships with students, right? That we don't aim to manifest that. But what we do is we identify and ask principals and after-school providers about who's that person who can access this child, right? And that is a distinguishing factor that these conversations don't necessarily play out in whole group settings. You got 30 students, you just do the best you can, right? So what we want to do is say, maybe it's the, maybe it's the dean of students, maybe it's the school psychologist, maybe it's we're not obsessed with the title. We want to change the bureaucratic mentality within these institutions and target that educator to then access that student in a different way. And then the magic starts to happen, right? Students start to write more about topics they can relate to. And now we can actually help them with their literacy level because they're talking about something they care about.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to do a job you don't care about? Right?
It's not easy.
But we have 8 and 9-year-olds, struggling with a topic that has nothing to do with their experience. And I'm very struck by the movement that's happening now that has shifted my career in many ways. We didn't talk about Mike Brown and Black Lives Matter back in when I was doing that consulting work. I thought I got to do something a bit more bold, righteous, and unapologetic, and I see that playing out even today. The Black and Brown experience in education is learning someone else's culture of success, learning someone else's culture, period, and cultural history. My background is an elective, right, in undergrad, right, and then but I spent 6-7 years learning about Western history and Anglo-Saxon heritage, and Caribbean heritage and experience is abbreviated. And I got to go out of my way to get that. So, and I did it, right? Shout out to Howard University where I completed my MBA. But I went to an institution that was built for me. So I think when we talk about equity, we talk about accessibility. There are challenges with stable Wi-Fi connections. There are challenges with, mobile devices and laptops. But we are in a virtual world, and now we, I think we're interested also in partnerships, with companies, the Verizons, the Comcast Ventures, these folks that are putting significant resources in communities to uplift. And I happen to also, have relationships with some of these local community foundations, and I do want to mention those folks in philanthropy that are doing a better job of gathering the data on students who don't have stable Wi-Fi and can do this work. So, but we're trying to meet students where they are. We do understand that our way to scale is to make sure that we get content in front of students that can help them at scale. That's really our main driver.
I really appreciate that. I have goosebumps because it's funny because many of my students I've become their student in this movement, just beyond COVID and the social justice pieces going on. And it's as a white male, I'm somebody who I really enjoy it, and I'm just like, wow, I have so much more to learn. I think this is true lifelong learning for me, and I have to check my privilege a lot, and it's an amazing, uncomfortable journey that I hope more people embrace in education. This is not just a law enforcement challenge, obviously, and I think a lot of people in education were just like, hey, there's a lot to start here. So I love that lens that you bring. I love the fact that We Are Marcus is doing that. On a discussion that I had yesterday on a panel, which was very interesting. It kind of touched on what you were touching about when students have access. Okay, so now what, right? So how does that help disadvantaged people? Because, and what more do we need to do? How do we know that that community, okay, they're ed tech ready, we have it in their hands, what now? Is there a mentoring piece to that? Is there, like, families? We started talking about families connecting. Wanted to just ask you, what are your thoughts on how do you determine that it's ready for ed tech and it's going to get some good data that is actually going to create some positive effect in education?
Yeah. I think you're very much touching on the concept of iteration in startups, right? And SEL. I came at this with not even having the language about SEL at the time. I was like, character development, mentoring, and then I, got around educators and they're like, oh, you're talking about SEL. I was like, well, got around other educators. I said, well, you're talking about holistic education. It's a new buzzword every generation. So first I would just start there with a sort of learning curve, product development curve. There are aspects to measurement that have existed in the collaborative for academic and social emotional learning. CASEL, it was a main feeder for some of the how we measure this work. The Aspen Institute also put out some pretty important information on this. From there, to answer your question directly, you asked about readiness of families and communities. I think they've been ready. I think there is a shift in behavior around the gold standard of face-to-face interaction. I have been waiting for this, and now we're in it. now we're all virtual. So I think communities of color are ready. I think after we get, I think that's a journey too. That's a process, not a destination. Mm-hmm. Families with, what if Ward 7 and Ward 8 in DC alone, there was a data gather on 5G connection in that area, and everybody got upgraded towers. Everybody got a router in their home or modem in their home, and I say everybody, 80% to start. We would have an opportunity to affect student learning right away, right? It's not that families and parents and Black and brown mothers and fathers don't want their students to have access to this. They do. And we do, I should say. And I think what happens next is, engagement measurements, progress measurements on specific attributes that We Are Marcus is measuring, some of the pieces out of CASEL, relationship skill development, adversity. I think what we've got right now is the College Board is putting out the adversity score for every student across the country. And why are we not measuring that earlier? Right?
Good question.
But also, my unapologetically Black self is sort of thinking, we've had this. What I want to do is I want to have it be measured in a culturally competent and culturally aware way. So it's not the College Board and, the majority culture telling minority cultures who they are based on their measurements. My interest is to shift the paradigm into, we have our own ways of relating to each other, and we just want to make that put that in the forefront of the discussion, and in the platform itself. I want these to be trusted spaces, and I want these to be genuine, vulnerable, restorative, and informed by restorative justice and trauma-informed practices. That's the raw deal.
That spot on. please run for education board somewhere. Because it's spot on. I've been an educator for 19 years, and it is very frustrating to see all these inequities. And I'm a white male, so there's a lens that I don't have, and it is way overdue. I always have hope. I have hope that what's going on in the world today will change some of this. But in that capacity of what's going on, we have COVID, we have a lot of a shift in social justice and the education piece. So there are students in the middle of this. So what I always like to ask guests is what would you tell a student, possibly a secondary education student, a post-secondary college kid, somebody who might just have graduated? What kind of advice would you give youth? And then on top of that, I'm going to ask another question. What kind of advice would you give to educators in a time? This is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. Yeah.
It's a great question. I think it's for me. I'll think about what I told my students at the end of the semester. This significant experience that they've undergone is really going to make them stronger. I was the shortest kid on the basketball court for about 15 years, and I love the game. I rode the bench my freshman year of high school, and then I was starting varsity player my junior year. It's not. There's no mistake in that. I think what happened there is I worked harder, and I reflected a lot. I became much more self-aware. What was I doing wrong? How could I think through the experiences to make me better at what I do? And I think, virtual or quarantine and stay at home and battling a pandemic, I think it speaks to very much what we're talking about today. When the lights go off, right? When no one's watching, that's what defines you as a person, right? When you're not worried about all the little things that are materialistic, all the little things that are, like who's doing what and how they're doing it. And you stop benchmarking yourself against other people, and you start to, measure against your best self. I'm confident that those students are going to, once they get that piece, they're going to really, surpass their wildest expectations and be, their ancestors' wildest dreams. Educators, I get welled up over that one. Easy for me to get. You got me on my stump speech today, man. So for educators, I think it's just of flexibility and being nimble and creative, particularly around engagement and measuring, checks for understanding, as well as how students are learning over time. It is significantly challenging to do that, but I think we've got to slow ourselves down. We've got to shift our pacing. We've got to be creative about how students make up work. How they get through challenging material. I think that also collaboration amongst colleagues and sharing best practices is going to be a bit. It's a new conversation in that regard, and don't give up. There was a great meme on this. Have you ever taken 6 classes, as a teenager and have shoddy Wi-Fi connection and try to learn everything online all in a week? The 12-year-olds are being asked to do things that adults would never even try. Right. So lead with empathy would be my headline, and don't give up would be the next.
Fantastic advice. Flexibility and empathy are there's no way around that. It will be clear if you don't have that. And I think that's a frustration as an educator. I think I share that with you. Want to give people an opportunity to find you. Where can people find We Are Marcus and Christopher King?
You can look me up for further information. King-talks.com is a great way to just check me out. But you can follow at _King Talks on Twitter and Instagram, and We Are Marcus. You can always check us out at wearemarcus.com. You can donate there, as well as get time to talk about, what the following school year and beyond might look like for you. And I'm interested in learning from you as well. And if you request a demo, we're not accepting cohorts currently. I'm doing research at the City Fund and through Ed Pioneers, and thereafter we might look to do some SEL engagements just to get to know schools, as well as gather information and provide whatever support we can. That's it. You can check us out there and reach out. I can also give my email in the chat, and you can go ahead and definitely disseminate that just for folks to reach out.
Got it. Christopher King, thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your passion, and sharing the way that you're disrupting education.
Thank you. Great meeting you, and great talk today. Keep doing the great work.
All right. Thank you, listeners. We'll be back for another episode later on. Please hit that subscribe button and keep disrupting education.